there's something about dirt. You get on dirt, you get out in the wilderness, and you lose track of time, and your best thinking is done when you're on the trail. I mean, you can solve a lot of life problems.
Running 100 miles seems impossible, and maybe even kind of crazy. And it is, but we believe in big crazy dreams. That's why we ran 100 miles. It was such a life-changing experience for us, we decided to devote this podcast to preparing and inspiring you to run your first ultra race.
Are you ready to feel the highest highs and the lowest lows? Are you ready to do what you once thought was impossible? Are you ready for your trail to 100? Thank you for joining us here on Trail to 100, the podcast made to help you finish your first 100-mile race. My name is Jacob Bateman, and joined along with me is my beautiful and lovely wife, Melody. And today we have Dave Ellis joining us. Now, Dave had a very special story to tell us, guys. It was very touching, honestly, one of the most emotional interviews we've yet had. Dave just recently overcame a head and neck cancer. And he also, on top of that, just ran the Bear 100 this last September. Dave ended up deciding to sign up for the Bear 100 right after stopping radiation and chemotherapy for his cancer. And he struggled through that process. And he talks about his struggle of seeing his body just degrade and degrade and degrade as he went through these treatments. And then the struggle of trying to get his body back after stopping these treatments. And he even talks about how he really didn't feel like he got his legs back until about 4 months before the Bear 100. So obviously there was a plethora of other issues he had to deal with. His gut hadn't fully recovered from all the treatments. Even his brain hadn't fully recovered. One thing about Dave is his saliva. He doesn't produce saliva, so he had to learn how to deal with that issue through a 100-mile race, which I know for me would cause me fits. So Dave had tons of things he had to overcome, but he still did it. He finished the Bear 100, and he passed 21 runners in the last 8 miles. I know you guys will enjoy this one. It was one of my all-time favorite interviews, so let's get to it. Dave Ellis. Well, Dave, thank you for joining us here on the podcast today. We are so excited to chat with you about your 100-mile story.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Glad to be on.
Yeah. So, Dave, I came across you through a Facebook post on the Bear 100 group where you talked about how your last 100-miler that you just ran there, you did it coming off of cancer treatment and not long after that. And we're going to get to that. We want to hear that story. But before we get to that story, what even drew you to the 100-mile distance in the first place?
Well, I've kind of been a little bit of a runner probably since early 20s. And I ran just so I wasn't fat, really. That was basically why I ran.
Good so reason to run.
But in 2011, I ran a half marathon, and I ran it with my sister and brother-in-law, and that kind of kicked me off. Running was maybe a divorce onset. In 2010, I was divorced and kind of needed something to fill my time that wasn't expensive, and running kind of fit the bill. It was either drugs, pornography, or running, and I chose running. I had to do something. Yeah, so I ran my first half marathon in 2011, and I ran a few other half marathons, and then I did a full marathon coming down Logan Canyon, top of Utah. I think that was in 2014 or 15. In 2015, I ran marathon coming down Big Cottonwood Canyon. At the top of Big Cottonwood Canyon is the Brighton Ski Resort. The Brighton Ski Resort is mile 55, mile 60 for Wasatch 100. I saw the Wasatch folks while I'm on the bus at 6 a.m. There's a 7 a.m. start. I'm on the bus at 6 a.m. I get up to Brighton and I see these runners and their headlights, and people are yelling out the bus, "Go Wasatch." And I didn't know what it was. And these were the 100-milers that had started 24 hours previously, just pulling into Wasatch or into Brighton 24 hours later. And I thought to myself, next year I'm doing that. Going to graduate from the 26 miles to the 100 miles. And I don't think I got into it that year. I got into Bear, the following year. So I did Bear in 2016 and Wasatch 2017. In 2015, I did that coming down Big Cottonwood, and then I did Bear, and then I did Wasatch. And then I also, when I was training coming down coming down Big Cottonwood for the Big Cottonwood Marathon, I lived so close to it, I would train on the trail. I'd drive my car up the canyon and run down. One weekend I'd start at mile 12, and the next weekend I'd start at mile 13 or 14 and run down to my house. I'd get my bike and ride my bike out, throw my bike in my car, and that would kind of be my day. And I did that over and over, training for that. I wanted to get into Boston, and so I did get into Boston, and I ran that marathon, and kind of that was my last road marathon. I said I like dirt much better. There's something about dirt. You get on dirt, you get out in the wilderness, and you lose track of time, and your best thinking is done when you're on the trail. I mean, you can solve a lot of life problems, personal problems, subconsciously, consciously, when you're on that trail. It's just God has made us a beautiful world, and it's great to get out and look at it. So that's kind of my progression as I went from half to full marathons to I did do 100-kilometer up in Pocatello, Scout Mountain, and then I jumped to a 100-miler. So I had a friend who had done 100-milers, and he had kind of nudged me along for years, and finally I had enough courage to try it. So, but that was the progression.
That
wow.
what I find impressive, Dave, is not to try to classify you, but like you told us earlier, you're a boomer. So if your first 100 was, you said 2016-ish, is that what you said?
Yeah. So I was 52 when I did that.
So
that's awesome.
I mean, to me, I was like, whoa, that's pretty old to start into the 100-mile. Like, you see some people in there, but they've been in there for years. They've been doing it their whole lives. But to start at that age, what gave you the faith that I can do it? Like, my body will hold up through this.
Well, so there's a statistic out there that I've heard of, is you run the same at age 18, and I believe it's like 60 or 65. So
really,
I've
that's
read
the
that.
statistic.
Yeah.
So I mean, is that amazing? Is this a great thing to do? I mean, your runway is so long. If you're like 30 years old, you're going to be running for the next 35 years, 40 years, and you're going to be running like you were an 18-year-old. And the best thing about this running is there is talent, but it's sheer will and determination is what gets you there. You don't need a whole lot of talent. These people basketball players, they have talent. They're very talented.
Yeah.
Sheer will and determination as a runner, that's what you need to get to the finish. I mean, I'll never win, and that's okay. I win myself, as in, it's a personal thing. I'll never be the first. So
yeah. Well, that's awesome. And that's a great mindset to have there. Makes me think that, Jeff Browning, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's in his 50s. He's in his 50s. Now he's been running for a while, but
he's actually winning races in his 50s. So that statistic you could say holds up there with when you think of that, you got a guy winning hundreds in his 50s.
Yeah.
That's what's so cool about running. It is a lifelong sport.
Yeah.
I feel like any ultra you go to, you see, 70, 80-year-olds who are towing the start line, you know?
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I hope to be one day. So
I bet you will be.
I hope so.
So how was that first 100? Like, what was the hardest part about that first 100-mile race?
The hardest part was mindset.
Makes sense.
So now it was the Bear, and the Bear is in late September. So weather can be a factor, and weather was a factor. The whole week I'm looking at the weather, and it is not looking good. I mean, they only forecast 10 days out, and you're looking 10 days out, 9 days, 8 days, and it's snow, rain. And you're going, this is not going to be good.
Oh no.
And then the race organizer director said, we're going to reroute this year because we don't want to put people in harm's way. We certainly don't want to put our aid stations up on the top of mountains where it's just snowing and they're having issues. And they said, okay, so we're going to have to talk with the Forest Service and figure out reroute. So I didn't even know the trail until the day before. And I remember getting in my car to drive I work out by Salt Lake International Airport and driving north on the I-15. And I remember this cloud of dust coming towards me, and all the litter on the freeway is blowing towards me. And I said, I'm going to be running in this tomorrow morning. My mentor had prepped me for this, and the advice is embrace the weather. I mean, like one of the things I'd said is if you stop and throw rocks at every barking dog, you never get to the end. And so embrace the weather. It's going to be cold. It's going to be snowy. You're going to be uncomfortable, and that's okay. You just keep moving forward. And so when we got to the starting line, I was 20 minutes late to the starting line.
Oh no.
When we got to the starting line, it was raining, and it rained and snowed for 24 hours. Not until the next day did the sun come out. And so you were uncomfortable the whole time. Went up in elevation, it was snowing. Went down in elevation, it was raining. So that year they did an out and back. They went to Tony Grove, which is about 50 miles out, and then it came back the 50 miles. So the reason I was late is I just used Google Maps, hey Siri, where's XXX? And it led me to the wrong city. And so I drove to this place, and
Siri's fault.
it's like, this is not the right place. And so then I had to go to the website, figure out what the exact address was, look up the address, type it in, and then get to the place. So I mean, by the time I got there, they were already taking down taking down the lights, taking down the banner that said start. And I went up to the lady and said, here I am. She says, I'll write down your name. And she says, I'll kind of follow you in the car and tell you where to go, because there was nobody left. And so I was running by myself for the first little bit.
Wow, if you can get through that 100-mile race as your first 100-mile race, you can run any race.
Yeah, but it was running. I mean, I had like 2-pound weights on my feet because of all the mud. You just your shoes were just full of mud, and you couldn't get rid of it because every step was just a mud fest. But there
awful.
was I don't remember the finisher rate on that, but it was still fairly decent. But standing wise, I think that was the best race I ever did. Finishing wise, I finished like the low 100s, because normally I'm in the high 100s. I finished in the low 100s on that race.
And that's starting 20 minutes late.
That's really good.
Yeah.
So something for your mental toughness.
Yeah.
I feel like I've heard about this bear race.
Bear weather.
I feel like I've heard people talk about that one year where it was so muddy and the mud was sticking to their shoes. Was this
when did you say this was?
2016.
2016. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah,
feel like I've
yeah.
heard people talk about that
Yeah,
year.
that's awesome. But like, I think like what you said there is really valuable with when your friend said embrace the weather. Like I've recently heard a really good ultra runner, Mike McKnight, talking to someone asked him the question of how do you get through the pain? How are you like so tough? And he was like, he actually said, he's like, I'm not tough. I just accept what I'm going through. And I was like,
Yeah.
that really hits home. Like it's really about just acceptance and embracement, whatever. Then you stop looking for a way out and you just accept
It's
this is
just
what I'm
about
doing.
the thing, even though it kind of stinks.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I like that acceptance. I really like that.
Yeah. Was there ever a point in that 100 where you thought maybe I'm not going to make it, or were you just pretty much head down and going?
Yeah, head down and going. So what they did, the bear, they normally it's it's 100 miles, and they normally have about 2,100 feet of elevation. Well, they cut it down to about 1,800 feet of elevation. So that was one way to compensate for the snow and the cold.
Mm.
So in the first 20 miles, they kind of did this out and back just to put on miles because we couldn't go up. And so, I got 15, 20 miles under my belt in a very fast time because they didn't just, normally on an ultra, they try and beat you and just, push you 4,000 or 5,000 miles on the first, or 4,000 or 5,000 feet in the first, 5-6 miles. Well, this was, I went 15 miles with hardly any elevation. So I thought, I'm already home at this point, but that kind of set my mind that I can do this. And then my friend came and he helped me. I had a change of clothes. I can't remember what aid station. He had a camper on the back of his truck. He dragged me in the back of his truck. I took off all my wet clothes, put on the dry clothes, and went out and started running again. That was a real boost to your mind. And another friend, he paced me for a little bit, and that those things just help you out when the people come and cheer you on. So
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, for real. So what kept you in the sport afterwards? Like, why not a one and done? Why'd you keep? You've run 6 100s now. Why do you keep coming back?
That's a good question. I think I don't have a good answer. I mean, selfishly,
Like, I don't know.
selfishly, I really do like to do it. It's just so interesting what the body can do. You don't think you can do something, and then you do it, and you go, wow, thank you, body, for holding up. I also think your motivation changes over time. It's fun to be a little kid again and go into the unknown. I think I wrote in some of my answers, most of us live a very ordinary, mundane life. We just kind of do the same thing over and over again. And we kind of know, if I go to work 40 hours a week, I get to live in my house for another month, and there'll be food on my table. Well, when you're at the beginning of a 100-mile race, there's the different things, it's just unknowns can happen. And that's kind of fun to be in that situation as an adult, to be in the unknown territory. I guess that I live a privileged life where I have shelter and food, so I'm very privileged that way. So I put myself in the situations to feel that. Also, people watch what you do, and they will gravitate toward what you do. I mean, I have children that just say, "My dad's a runner. I must be a runner. I'm going to start running." And
Mhm.
I mean, I have a daughter who's done a 180 with her life, and running was one part of that. I mean, she's lost 50 pounds in over 2 years, just
Wow.
started running. And her motivation was, my dad can run. I must be a runner too. So, I mean, there's people out there that watch you. So,
Wow. I think you brought up a lot of good points. One point that I want to bring up is you said you keep coming back because you feel like a kid again. And I can relate to that because I always say that the mountains are like the playground for grown-ups. It's just fun to get out there and run, and I think a lot of runners can relate to these super fun runs where you just feel good. It feels like you're flying, and sometimes it's fun to just get up there in the mountains and jump off of rocks and like run through
Yeah,
streams and get on top
yeah,
of the mountain and yell. You get to just
yes,
play, right? So I really
yep,
like that point, and also the last point of being an example to the people around you. You never know who's watching, and I mean, you do know that your family's watching and your kids are watching, and I think that's really cool that your daughter kind of followed in your footsteps. I feel like running is contagious. I feel
Yeah.
like you start running and the people around you are like, "Oh, wow, you are really happy. Maybe I'll try that."
No.
you- yeah,
But
yeah. You
Dave,
get
like I want to second what Melody said about being a kid, but I got a little bit of a different point. Like I've never thought of it in that way. Like you get to feel like you're a kid again, but like when you're a kid, you're always pushing yourself. You're doing something new, right? Parents are encouraging you to try this,
Well, you
come
have
on.
school, you have
Yeah.
college, there's always a goal to
There's
work
always
towards. Yeah.
there's always something that is a little bit terrifying because you've never done it and you're going into the unknown with it. And I've never thought about that. Like, yeah, that's what when you line up for an ultra, you're going into the unknown. Like you're not
yeah,
100% sure if you can do that. But here you are lining up, testing yourself to see if you can. So
Right.
yeah,
Well, and I feel like everyone needs a certain balance of certainty and a certain balance of uncertainty.
yeah.
And if there's, like you said, if there's too much certainty in your life, maybe these ultras provide that balance because you get a little bit more of that uncertainty.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Agreed.
So Dave, with what I mentioned earlier about you, how we found you is you put up a post on the Bear 100 group about how you just ran the last Bear 100 here in the fall of 2023, and you were coming off of a cancer diagnosis and cancer treatment. Could you give us a little background on that, and then what went into your decision to do a 100-mile race so soon after battling cancer?
I think it was just part craziness because I mean, I I don't even know how I had the presence of mind to sign up for the bear. I mean, if you don't sign up like this year, if you didn't sign up within the first couple days, you're out of luck. And so somehow I signed up for the bear. The bear's pretty forgiving. They have a wait list, and so other races have a lottery. You're either in or out. So bear has a wait list, and I, I signed up to get on the wait list. And I guess I wanted my body back. Cancer, it's really not cancer took it. It's the cancer treatment takes it. Radiation. I had radiation and chemotherapy. I had 300 hours of chemotherapy. So I had head neck cancer. Head neck cancer's brutal in that you can't cut it out. It's inside your head, and you can't cut it out. So they beat it out of you with radiation and chemotherapy. So yeah, I signed up for the bear in December of 2022. I ran the bear in 2023, and I signed up and kind of dismissed it. I didn't tell anybody because I was too embarrassed to tell anybody because at the time I probably couldn't run a half mile without stopping. After my last chemo, I had 6 rounds of chemo. After my last chemo treatment, I walked 5 houses and was exhausted, came home and had to take a nap. And so in 13 months, I went from walking 5 house lengths to running 100 mile, which is a miracle for me.
Wow.
I gave myself a week off after chemo and said, I'm gonna I'm going to start running again. I was bound and determined to run again. I made a goal, a 10-year goal in my early 50s to run Mount Olympus. Mount Olympus is on the east side of Salt Lake City. It's a 7.5 mile out and back with 4,200 feet of elevation. So it's pretty steep. And I made a goal in my early 50s to run that 500 times in 10 years. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, I was at 430 something. And I was pretty ticked off if I didn't get my goal. I wanted my goal of 500 times. So I thought, cancer can't be that difficult. It's that difficult. I mean, I did metrics when with chemo. After my first chemo, it took me about a week before I felt like a person again. After my second chemo, I remember I guess I can't remember my second one. After my third chemo, I did a hike that was about 6 miles and about 3,000 feet of elevation. I mean, I didn't run it. I couldn't run it. I hiked it. After my fourth chemo, I got halfway. That same hike, I went halfway and said, I can't do this. I had about 4 weeks between chemos. So I kind of try and build up in those 4 weeks. I couldn't do anything the first week. The second week, I'd go maybe walk for a half mile, and then I'd try this third week, I'd go 2 miles, and then the next week I'd go whatever I could go. So I went, after my third chemo, I went the full distance, it was about 3,000 feet of elevation, 6 miles. After my fourth chemo, I went half the way. After my fifth chemo, I went a mile and came home and just barfed. So, and then after my sixth chemo, I went 5 house lengths. So you can see it's accumulative. You just go down into the gutter with this stuff. At one point, I was thinking there's no way I can take chemo again. I'd been 28 days and I still wasn't feeling like a person. And I was gonna have to tell my doctor, we're gonna have to push this off. I can't tolerate this. But I had a weekend. I felt good Saturday. I felt good Sunday. So I took my chemo again on Monday. But anyway, so you can kind of understand how chemo you just stair step down. You never get back up to where you were. You just start again and you go lower. You start again, you get lower. You just keep going lower and lower till I could walk 5 houses and I had to take a nap.
Wow.
I gave myself a week off after that last chemo. That was 300 hours of chemo, and I decided I get a week off to sit around, and you really can't do anything anyway. My routine for those 4 weeks, first week I would do nothing. Second week I had enough energy to watch Netflix. Third week I could read a book. Fourth week I'd read a book and then start over again. So do nothing, just lay in bed, watch Netflix, read a book, and then so I started walking after my a week off, and I walked for a mile or two, and then the next week I did the same thing. I think I did that I started walking around the block, and then I'd start to try and run, and I'd run for a house length or two and then have to walk again. And I just keep doing this and try and run farther and farther. And after about 3 or 2.5 months or something, I just said, I hate running. I understand why people hate running, because this is no fun. Finally, after 3 months, I got endorphins again, and I thought, I love running. So it was just the endorphins. It took me about 3 months before I got endorphins again. And then as a runner, you get in shape, and after 5 minutes, you can just start pumping endorphins out. But it took a long time for those to come back. And then one day I remember, hey, I'm actually running up a hill. It took me 3 months before I could run, flat a half mile, and then just slowly got better from there. But at work, a group of us would go run 5:30 in the morning before work, and And I tried that once and get sick. So I'd push it off for a month and I try it again and get sick. And I push it off again and get sick. I just kept getting sick. I couldn't push my body for these runs. It was just, too much to go to try and work. When I went back to work, after about 3 months after my last chemo. I had to stop working. There's just no way you could work. Remember, my doctor's note for disability is unable to do cognitive thinking, just your brain doesn't work. So I started working again after about 3 months it was like 2.5 months after my last chemo, and then worked 20 hours, worked 30 hours. After a year, I'm back to 40 hours. But, at 3, 4 months, 5 months after chemo, I'd stress my body. I'd get sick. And then I wouldn't bounce back like I used to. Normally, you could go do a 5-mile run. I could do those every day for the, rest of your life. But, if I did a 5-mile run, I'd need 2 days off to recover. It's like, so 5 months after my last chemo would have been, it's probably March, about this time a year ago. And I'm not recovering, still getting sick. And we're in the 3rd month of the year, and the Bear 100's in the 9th month of the year. And so I got 6 months to kind of get ready for this. And I'm thinking, this is not going to work. I'm not recovering. And finally, about 6 months out, I say my body, no, it was more of like 8 months out, 9 months out. It was 9 months out from chemo, which would have put us in about June timeframe. Yes, that's about right. June timeframe. So that's the 6th month. Bear 100's in the 9th month. I finally recovered where I could go to kind of do a big run on the weekend. Big run is 20, 25 miles, and I wouldn't get sick. I never did as many. I train on Mount Timpanogos in American Fork, Utah. That's 14 miles out and back and about 4,500 feet of elevation. Back in June, I was doing June, July, I was doing laps. I started with 1 lap, and then the next weekend I did 2 laps. And I thought, okay, I'm going to build up till I get 3 laps. So I could never build up to 3 laps. Too tired, and I get really dizzy. Yeah, it turns out I had the chemo affected my vestibular nerve, which is to your inner ear and affects your balance. And I've kind of worked through that and working through that with therapy right now. So finally, my ticket came up for the Bear 100, and I had to go in or out. And I just said, I'm going to go in. And I had that was probably in June, July timeframe that I decided I'm gonna really run it, paid my money, and luckily I didn't have to do trail work. I could just pay for trail work because I did not have time to do trail work. I was working, and Saturdays are like precious gold. It's like I got to go do a big run, 20 miles or something, and the goal was to get up to like 45 miles. I never made it to the 45 miles. I made it to 30 miles, and I would get, like I said, dizzy from the vestibular nerve problem. And one of my other goals was doing this was I was just mad that I had neuropathy. That's nerve damage. So I have nerve damage. It's a chemo-induced peripheral neuropathy. So your hands and your feet are pins and needle. And I thought, blood is what heals things. So when you're running, you should get lots of blood flow in your feet. And so this should heal something. Either that or I'm going to get used to it. Well, it didn't heal it, and I'm not used to it, and I still have it. So you just get to live with walking on pins and needles all the time. Going into the race, I had damage to my stomach also from the chemo, and so I couldn't tolerate foods with high calorie content. I'd eat it, and I'd get sick from that. I couldn't really tolerate those kinds of foods. So I had to kind of figure out what foods I could tolerate while I'm running, and use that. Normally like a Snickers bar, I'd like a little mini Snickers bar. I eat that, I just feel sick, just stomach ache. So and I knew my brain wasn't healed either because I was still getting exhausted. I would go to work, and in the afternoons to work, I just have to go find an office and go in the office, sit in a chair and close my eyes for 10 minutes and just kind of let my brain decompress because just exhausted. But I signed up for the race and I was going to try it. And so I remember getting to the starting line and thinking my brain is my weak link. And I haven't done the training running that I normally have done. So I'd done 33 miles and about 10,000 feet of elevation. Normally I try and do 40, 50 miles, 45, 50 miles with about 1,400 feet of elevation. So I was undertrained per my standards, and my brain was not working correctly. Still getting dizzy from the nerve damage. So started the race, started running, and thought, if I get to mile 50, well, I wanted to get to mile 50 because my daughter met me at mile 50, and I wanted to run with her from Tony Grove to the next aid station from mile 50 to 60. Mm-hmm. And that was a fun because she'd never run, in an ultra, and she was, just in awe that there's all these people running in the middle of the night. It's 1 a.m. and we're just like running in the middle of the night. And she's like, wow, this is pretty cool. I said, yeah, this is kind of fun. So we did that, and then she peeled off, and I remember, somewhere in the mile 60 range, my brain is just exhausted, and I know it's exhausted. But, my time was doing pretty good. I was amazed how well I was doing on my time. And I thought maybe I can finish, but I'm just trying to relax my brain, shut my brain down as much as possible. I'm just focusing on the feet in front of me. I'm just going to follow these feet. I've been hearing voices for a couple hours, and I know they're not real. I'm ignoring the voices that I'm hearing and just following these footsteps. Well, this person came to a T, and they went to their left. And so I started going to my left, and then she came back down. And so I just turned around and went right back the same way I had just come from, because I'm just didn't have any feet to follow and my brain's not working. So I started going, the wrong way on the trail, and and then finally I ran into about 8 people. I see about eight headlamps coming towards me, and I'm going, where are you going? You're going the wrong way. And I start arguing with people. And finally my brain kind of kicked in. I'm looking at my Gaia map, and I can't figure out, my brain's not working. And I look at my Gaia map, and they finally convinced me that you're wrong. And it's like, duh, I'm arguing with 8 people. I'm kind of embarrassed that I'm arguing with 8 people, but my excuse is my brain ain't working, and it's 2 a.m. and I'm doing something that I probably shouldn't be doing, this close out of cancer. But they turned me around, and then I was going with a couple of females, and finally it was kind of funny. They had to make a pit stop in the woods, and they said, "Are you going to be okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll be okay now," because I guess my brain started working again or whatever. But started eating food. I'm not sure, but so I started going again, and then I had a buddy pick me up at mile 75. So that's at the Beaver Mountain Lodge. He picked me up at mile 75, and I think I had 10 hours, maybe 8 hours to go or something. And I thought, okay, I can do this. This is only another marathon, no problem. And I have a lot of time left. And I keep, asking him, okay, how much time? He says, you're on pace, you're on pace, you're on pace. And finally, about 10 miles out, we're on pace. How much spare time do I have? And he says, you only have like 15 minutes of spare time. And I'm like, pulling my hair out. I'm just like, I am not going to not finish. I have to finish. I've put so much effort into this thing. I mean, I've been training. I mean, this has been like a singular goal for the last 13 months, since I couldn't, 5 house lengths. And, I started from five house lengths. I said, I'm going to finish this. And he told me you got like 15 minutes of spare time. And I'm thinking that's not enough. If anything goes wrong, I'm not going to make it in time because of the cutoff is 36 hours on this 100-mile race. So we're mile 90-ish or something. And at mile 90, you got to go up a steep hill. It's only maybe 600, 700 feet of ascent, but it seems like a mountain and a half. And you get up at the top, and then from mile 92 down, it's down to Bear Lake. It's all downhill. And I thought, okay, I'm going to start run walking. I'm going to run walk. And so I started doing that, the run walk, and just so I have a buffer, because I needed a buffer because I was stressed out that I'm not going to make this cutoff time. And so I run walk, and I started running farther than I was walking, and each time. And finally, I just said, I'm just going to run the whole time. It's like I'm not stopping. I've never gotten into a mode like this where I've been going at it for the last 32, 33 hours, and I'm running down the hill. And normally you're kind of run walk and stuff, and I just started picking people off and passing people. And I'm telling myself, I'm the kid with cancer, and I just passed you, and I'm just past people, and I'm going to beat this cancer, and just kept pushing that through my mind that I'm going to beat this cancer and beat the next person and beat the next person. And I just kept running. I passed 21 people in the last 8 miles on this race, and then finished with an hour and 10 minutes to spare. So it's 34 hours and 50 minutes, and I had a 15-minute buffer back at mile 90. And so I, made up an hour or something. And so I was super proud of myself that I finished this race and then passed 21 people in the end. So that was a very good lesson for me. I mean, one of the lessons is your body can do more than you think it can. So,
yeah.
Wow. I don't have words to describe how I'm feeling right now, but I'm feeling emotional. That's what I'm feeling. You need a movie. They need to make a movie of you.
Well, it was a very emotional time for me, really emotional. I mean, I literally had tears in my eyes as I'm doing this. And like I was telling myself, stop crying. You're going to not see the rocks because you got tears in your eyes. So, stop crying, because it was emotional for me. I mean, to beat cancer and to run a 100-miler and then be running the last, 8 miles of this thing was amazing for me.
Wow.
Yeah. So you see me drinking water all the time. I don't make saliva anymore. So this is my saliva, just water. I have to keep pushing water down or I can't talk.
Hey, well, that's what we all should be doing, is drinking water like that.
Yeah. So I constantly have to drink water.
Well, that is truly amazing, Dave. I mean, like, as Melody said, that like it I honestly felt emotional too, as you talked about, I'm gonna beat cancer, as you're running, and you're saying that as you run those last 8 miles in. It's like, wow, it's like that your cancer and your 100-mile race came to a head right there, where you showed it, like, I'm here. I'm sticking around. This is who I am.
I honestly, we've never had a story on this podcast that has brought me this close to tears. I feel like this is a story of hope. I feel like, I mean, maybe this sounds silly, but I feel like I can relate in my own way. I don't want to compare pregnancy to cancer by any means, but I can relate to taking step downs. When you're pregnant, It's like
Yeah.
every trimester is a step down. And I remember even complaining to Jacob, like, what's the point of working out? Because I'm just gonna get fatter and slower, you know. But
Yeah.
anyways, and then you have I also kind of got to a point where like I'm the lowest I've ever been in terms of my fitness level and trying to come back in. And it's been 5 months and I still can barely run. And things are getting better. We're getting there, but I feel like there's a lot of people out there who can relate, whether it's cancer or pregnancy or an injury or this thing that they love is taken away from them. You can't do it. And now you have to start all over. You've had years and years and years of building up this fitness base and creating this lifestyle, creating an identity for yourself, and all of a sudden it's stripped away and you have to start all over in a sense. There's some things that can't be stripped away from you, like your experience and the knowledge, but you still have to build from place that you still have to start over in a sense. And that is really, really hard. And I feel like you had
Yes. Yeah.
every excuse in the book. Well, it's not only hard physically, but it's hard mentally. There's so much you have to deal with mentally when you're building back up again. You're kind of
Yeah.
struggling with your identity and just these maybe even struggling with like this isn't fair. Like why me? Like I did all this work. I was listening to a Nick Bear podcast today, and he said your fitness is built with drops in the bucket, and you can lose your fitness in buckets. You build it in drops and lose it in buckets.
Oh,
And it's true. Your fitness can be, it's gone like that, and then you have to build it up again. And um, I guess that's just life, but I guess what I'm saying is that's hard. And no, I don't know exactly what you went through, but like I said, I think a lot of myself and a lot of listeners can relate to this trying to rebuild. And I think you had every excuse in the book to not rebuild, to not do this, I feel like you
Give it
had
more time.
yeah, you had so many excuses, but you did it anyways. And I also see so many people in their older age and their older years, neuropathy and these other just these things, pain, chronic pain, and they just give up. I've seen so many people do that, and here you are dealing with neuropathy and all these other
saliva.
no saliva, all these other things that you're dealing with, but you haven't let any of those things stop you. I think that's amazing. You are living your life to the fullest, and I think that's what
yeah.
this is about. That's what inspires me to run ultras. I want to be like you one day. I
Yeah.
hope that I'm also running ultras in my 70s and 80s, and I think that also gives hope to people who have been trying to get back into running, and it's been months, and they're not getting there. But I think it's like that ice cube analogy, and I'm sorry, I know I'm totally monologuing right now. It's like that ice cube analogy of ice melts at 33 degrees, right? And it's like it's just warming up, warming up, warming up, and you don't see any movement in the ice cube until it finally hits 33 degrees, and then it starts to melt. So I think it's maybe you don't see any progress yet, but it's just baby steps, baby steps, baby steps, and
Yeah.
eventually you get to the melting point. So anyways, I'll stop now. I'm just really inspired.
I told you about the Mount Olympus, the 10-year goal. And, that's my gym is Mount Olympus. I live 4 or 5 miles from the trailhead, and I do that at least once a week, sometimes 3, 4, times a week. So, I'm like dying to do Mount Olympus because I haven't done it for, all during chemo. I couldn't do it. Just it takes too much energy. So 7 weeks after my last chemo treatment, I went up Mount Olympus, and I went up with poles because I'm just not very stable. So it took me 5 hours to get up Mount Olympus. My record time before chemo was 2 hours and 14 minutes, yeah, up and back on Mount Olympus, so it's twice as long as it's taken me in the past. So I went up after, 7 weeks. So that's 8 months that I had done Mount Olympus and did my first Mount Olympus. And then 2 weeks after the bear, I did my 500th lap on Mount Olympus. And so that was within the
Wow.
2 week span, I finished I finished the bear, which was just an unbelievable goal. And then I finished that goal of doing Mount Olympus 500 times. And, it was something, it's a 10-year goal is humongous. If you think about a 10-year goal, people make goals and they throw them out there, 2 months, I'm not doing this. Well, I made a 10-year goal. That is a long time to finish a goal. And
Yeah.
I'm like pissed. I'm not going to make my goal. It's like, I want to make my goal. I want to live just so I can make my goal. And I finally, made my goal, and I was a happy man to make that goal.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. Congratulations.
Well, Dave, our time is winding down, but before we let you go, we ask every single one of our guests this question. What is your top piece of advice for someone who's looking at running their first 100-miler? They're thinking about it. They want thinking about pulling that trigger. Then they come to you and say, "Hey, Dave, I'm thinking of doing this race. What advice do you have for me?"
I think of course, there's a lot of training that goes into it. If you've trained yourself well, then your body's ready. You got to ready your mind. And we talked about this already, you just embrace it and do it, accept it, and just go do it. Yeah, you're going to learn things about yourself that you never knew about yourself. If you don't do it, you're never going to discover these things. And it's always good to learn more about yourself. So go try it, go do it, go sign up.
Don't think about it, just do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Dave, thank you for joining us here on the podcast today. What a story you got. And we are so excited to share this with our listeners. And it's like what Melody said. I just want to echo it all and say, like, when I grow up, I want to be like Dave Ellis. So
You don't want cancer.
Okay.
I used to think try everything once in life. And then I had cancer. It's like, we can skip over that one. Okay.
Yeah. No, with the way you describe, especially the chemo treatments, oh my gosh.
We just want your
miserable.
mental toughness
Yes.
without the hard part.
Well, that's how you become mentally tough, is affliction, right? So
Right.
I mean, when you look at someone who's mentally tough, I mean, what did they go through to get to that point in their life? They did something really, really tough. Yeah. Or it's accumulation of things over a long period of time. And what did they do? How did they get there? They weren't just born this way. They've done some hard things in their life.
Yeah.
That's 100% true.
Well, thank you, Dave, for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So a big thank you goes out to Dave Ellis for coming on and sharing his story today. Wow, what a story. What an experience. What a trial he went through to go from being a consistent 100-mile runner to then seeing your body just fall apart and lose it all, and then try to come back from that within a year to come back and do another 100-mile race. Just inspiring. It was definitely feel honored that we were able to talk to him. So thank you, Dave, for coming on the pod. Make sure, everyone, that you check out our website. We have the write-ups for the athletes. They all answer questions previous to our interviews, and we post those answers on our website, trailto100.com, where you can learn even more about how they accomplish their 100-mile goals. So go check that out, because a lot of things that are said in those write-ups, they aren't always said in the interviews, and they are gold to know if you're trying to reach your 100-mile distance for the first time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And remember, if you want to run 100 miles, make it happen.